My name is Charles Stanhope. I'm a member of the board. And on behalf of the board, the staff, all of the patrons of this institution, we welcome you. Thank you for your interest in this topic, which is so very important. Before I briefly introduce our speaker who needs no introduction, I want to remind you that here in the holiday season, the library is providing you some opportunities to help it out with the holiday sale, which is down by the circulation desk. The two raffles, one for the Judy Taylor print, which is up here over the mantle, and one for a gallon of freshly caught scallops by our local scallop fisher person, Holly Masterson. And please come back, but also come for the month of December and January, enjoy the quilts that are here. They're here, they're wonderfully crafted and inspired, creative items that we're proud to share and give them an opportunity to celebrate their talents. And watch across the year, every month, there's an emphasis of what is on the walls here to celebrate. So without further ado, our speaker of the evening, Carolyn Ball, well-known local personality and government leader, member of the faculty at the Muskie School at the University of Southern Maine, still teaching there remotely from right here on Main Street. So her topic is a topic well known to her and something with which she has been embedded and imbued for quite some time. She has been teaching about it, preparing the next generation of leaders of municipal groups and organizations and towns. So thanks all for coming, and we'll turn it over to Carolyn.
Okay, so I need to probably speak clearly. Thank you. Thank you, and I need to speak loudly, I suspect, for everybody. So on the first slide, it says how local government works, towns and cities. There's no difference. If Southwest Harbor wanted to call itself the city of Southwest Harbor, it could. The many states make a differentiation based on size, and there are certain responsibilities of cities versus towns, not here. So it's just a custom, and larger communities obviously call themselves cities, but Ellsworth is not particularly large. I think it's 6,000 and it calls itself a city. And Bar Harbor is 5,000 and doesn't call itself a city. So it's custom. If you lived in another state, there are many different names for towns, villages, and we have villages, but usually they're a part of a town. But there are some places where a village is actually the name of a town. New Jersey has townships that are the town. So you can go from place to place, and even those names may vary very much. Now, when I started this, I was going to put "and counties" in parentheses, because we don't have very much county government in the state of Maine. And in fact, in New England, we don't have very much county government. So I've lived in Massachusetts and Connecticut, and many of you may have lived in other parts of New England. So there are places on the map that are called counties. Rhode Island, I should add also. There are places on the map that are called counties, but in Rhode Island, they don't exist at all as an entity of government. In Massachusetts, they have sheriffs, and those sheriffs are elected, but they're not the kind of sheriff that goes out on the road and patrols. They handle the jail. And so that's pretty much county government in Massachusetts, none in, as I said, in Rhode Island, and there's none in Connecticut either. So I was having a conversation with someone about jails and how it was handled. Well, I had to Google it because I wasn't really sure, even though I'd grown up in Connecticut. Well, it turns out that the state police send them to state jails if they need to arrest somebody. So New England is very different, and that's what I want to point out to you in terms of the responsibilities of local government in New England. So if you go out anyplace else, county government is much bigger. So there are county roads, there are county schools, there are county libraries. So there's a variety of service, including county welfare, whatever that might be called. So here, if the last resort is general assistance, so you go to the local government. So yes, we do have county government and we do have jails, but even then, we've got a couple of counties that share a jail. So even then, we don't have one of the services that often our counties provide. And of course, that's where your deeds and kind of documents go. So we still have that. So in terms of thinking about government, this is really the place to start, local government, because counties don't really exist in the state. How many of you lived outside of New England? I know you have. Okay. Could I have some states, please?
Utah.
Utah,
Good, Utah, Alaska.
New York,
Alaska.
Alaska. I don't know anything about Alaska.
Oh, I know.
Villages, they have villages in New York. I know that. Mhm. And they are
Oh.
entities, local government entities. Yeah. Mhm.
Pretty good, Montana.
Okay. So,
Massachusetts.
oh, Montana's good. So nice square counties, and the center is the courthouse. So if you go out farther west, you'll see these buildings, and they may not be the courthouse anymore, but in the smaller counties they are. And it's right in the center of the town. And we call our town greens, which we don't really have in this town, but the town square. So very different. And so that's why it's so important to understand a little bit about how local. And I don't have a place to add it in, but if you noticed when we had the elections for our select board, they're nonpartisan. And that's part of the progressive movement. And if you recall when former President Trump and Hillary Clinton were running, there were a number of Democrats that would call themselves progressives. And from my perspective, I wondered, well, what do they really mean by that? But the progressive movement was in the 20s. And from there, we got a concern about corruption in local government. And so particularly in New England, it took hold to develop a town manager form of government. And so it's historically nonpartisan, although you can go to, for example, Portland, where there's a partisan election, and I think Waterville and some other places too. But by and large, our local government elections are nonpartisan, assuming that the kinds of decisions we make don't relate to whether we're liberal or conservative or a particular party. Although sometimes we can get tense, but by and large, no. So here in Maine, Maine adopted the town manager plan of government in the 20s. It started, I think, at Auburn or Lewiston, Auburn, I believe. And it's under state law, Title 30A. So if you want to know anything about town government, or somebody asks you, just say Title 38. So Title 38. So, and it happened, it was a University of Maine faculty member who started promoting the idea of nonpartisan elections, a town manager who was a professional town manager and would be trained at the University of Maine and other places as well. But that was the idea, that we need a professional administrator to run town. So I've talked to you about one part, and you're saying, well, aren't there names of people that are town administrator, administrative assistant? Yeah. So that means that they're not following completely the town manager plan of government. So if we go off the island to Lemoyne and Trenton, they have administrative assistants. Now they follow pretty much the town manager form of government, but that means that the administrative assistant works directly for the select board and is not considered the administrator. So the select board are the administrator of what goes on. In practice, it's not that different. And if you see a town that has a town administrator, that means that they're not following the town manager plan. And those kinds of towns that have a town administrator, for example, have what's called a charter. And so that instead of having the town manager plan of government assign responsibilities, they decide what they want to do. So you've probably seen in the paper that Bar Harbor has argued about what needs to be in the charter and whether they can change the warrant committee, for example. So they put information into what's called a charter, And we did not because we're following the town manager plan of government. And so that town manager plan of government also has the select board. So that's the default way of administering and managing the town is the select board. So what do you do if it's called the town council? That just means that the town decided that it didn't want to follow this and have their own particular developments. For example, as I mentioned, the warrant committee in Bar Harbor. And so they call themselves the town council instead. Same thing. So just to refresh your memory, and most of you know about this, the select board approves the warrant articles for the town meeting. Well, the select board is the legislature, and that's hard for me to think about, but it's the legislature. So if something comes before us, we make a decision. But then we turn around in town manager plans of government and we ask the citizens to become the legislature. So you approve how we're going to spend the money and you approve, say, land or use ordinances. And usually we do those on the ballot. So both the town meeting that happens in May and the balloting are considered town meeting. Now, let me go back to warrant. Do I have people that occasionally at least watch British television, the crime shows? A few? Do you recall that sometimes the police officer says, here's my warrant card? Well, he or she is affirming that they are approved. So when we on the select board decide how much we're going to spend, that's considered a warrant article, and it's the full town warrant. So, another thing about this is none of this shows in the town manager plan of government a mayor. Well, many towns have mayors, but most are ceremonial, they chair. So the chair of the select board is similar to the mayor in many towns. So you'll see mayor, but by and large, they're just ceremonial. And they chair the select board or the council rather. So no different, but they have that title. There are a few places in Maine, Portland one, where they revisited their charter and they decided to have a mayor have more responsibilities. Before this, and this is only a few years back, that mayor was just the first among equals and didn't have any further responsibilities. Now they make the big bucks. They're making $60,000, I believe. And they have some responsibilities, but not a lot. So they present the budget, but who's really developing the budget is the city manager of Portland. So again, there's this belief in nonpartisan professional management. So Boston is a nonpartisan city. So it's part of the progressive movement. So the elections in Boston are all without any D's or R's or I's in front of the names of the people on the city council. And indeed, they have a city manager too. You rarely hear about the city manager because you hear about the mayor. Do you, and a few of you are old enough, mayor called Mayor Menino? Yeah, a few of you. And do you recall his
In
nickname?
Boston,
Yeah,
he just died, right?
not too long ago, a
Yeah,
year.
of
So,
course.
do you recall his nickname? The negative nickname was Mumbles. I used to listen to a lot of talk radio. So Mumbles Menino. So I asked a person who was from Boston, and he actually worked for the town council, city council. I asked him, how can this guy keep getting elected? Because he truly had difficulty speaking. So the mumbles was quite accurate. And he said he went to every event. He went to the parades, he went to the opening ceremonies. So although he had more than a ceremonial position, by and large, he treated it as a ceremonial position. And so he kept getting reelected and reelected.
And we thought he was wonderful.
Yes, yes, he was, because,
Because you showed up.
yeah, he came to your organization's opening, gala, whatever it might be, parade.
He could hardly walk, he had
Yeah.
cancer, and he came to this
Yeah.
little statue
Yeah.
for Black History. It was like
Well,
amazing, you know, you want to cry but when you
Yeah.
see it.
And he was much beloved, again, because he chose that ceremonial
Yeah.
role. And he was wonderful at it, even if he couldn't speak too well. So let me talk a little bit about the town manager. It's a terrible job. So they're appointed by the select board. So just as any organization would hire somebody, the town hires somebody, except that in our particular case, it's 5 people that are hiring that person, the select board. And they supervise all departments. And again, if I pointed out that in an administrative assistant, they're not technically supervising the departments, it would be the select board. So, but they have that responsibility, and it's in Title 30A. So we actually don't need a job description because the job description's in Title 30A. But because it's not necessarily up to date, it doesn't have anything about marketing or economic development. Obviously, towns develop job description. But the Title 30A says that they supervise all the departments. So that means that they're responsible for the hiring and firing. And we might be involved, the select board might be involved, for example, in how we choose the police chief, which we recently did. But that person supervises all the departments and they make recommendations. And that's where it's really tough. So, so if somebody brings something forward to a select board, whether it's in where they call it a town council in Bar Harbor or here in Southwest or Tremont. So if they make recommendations for what they would suggest, and here's the tough part, it's just a suggestion to us. So we could say, no, that's not what we want to do. Yes, that's what we want to do. The big part is that they prepare the budget, and that's what's happening right now. So it happens throughout the year as we make changes, but by and large in December, the town manager is preparing the budget. And in January, we meet and go over the budget. So it's quite an extensive process. And if you remember when you're going to vote and act as a legislature is in May. So it's a long process. And they assist residents. And that's what the wording says in the town manager plan. So I've got a little picture there of some sidewalks. So I was talking to a town manager, so not here. And a person came in, a citizen came into his office and had some concern. He read that a neighboring town was no longer going to plow the sidewalks. And he rambled on and talked. And the town manager said, rest assured, that would never happen in this town. We would plow the sidewalks. And so as the citizen was leaving, he said, well, how many miles of sidewalks do we have? None. So sometimes we as citizens have misinformation. We have concerns that aren't concerns that happen. And that's the town manager's responsibility to assist those residents. Could you go to your town council member or your select board member? Yeah, you could do that as well. But that's the person that's there 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, and can assist you most often. But sometimes that's not correct, the information you've got. And just to go over just a little bit about the budget. So I put a little note on the corner, and can you see it that it says 0.5 or 0.5%? I got to plug us since I'm here in Southwest Harbor. That's how much our budget for the town increased last year. Now, the budget is also what you as citizens vote on, also includes the county and it includes the school. So our taxes did go up more than 0.5%, but that was the part of the budget. So schools, you mentioned, Charles, some schools and trying to understand the budget. Well, the schools are in New England entities of the towns. So if you went someplace else, they're entities of the county usually. And you know from all the back and forth related to COVID that some states have more responsibilities for what the schools can do than here. So they're entities of the town, but they're self-administered. So they have a board and we vote for that board, but they're part of the town. And so that building over there belongs to the town. And that would be true pretty much in all New England, that they're entities of the town. Go out west, not so. So that makes
No.
sense, yeah. So each department, although we don't establish the school, and we also write out the checks for the school as well, because they're an entity of the town. So for Pematech, we write out the checks for Pematech. So in the budget process, which starts now, there's a budget for each department. And there's something called reserve accounts. And reserve accounts are things that we want to save some money, but they're not major items, but we want to save some money over time. And so we put some money in reserve accounts. And I think I've got Ryan here and I've got Lydia. Can you think of a reserve account that's a good example for them?
Well, there's a paving account and a highway account, and they decide each year what they really need to do that year. They put that amount of money in the reserve account. So the reserve accounts are what are expected to be used during that coming fiscal year and then replenished.
Yeah. Mhm. You mean the regular budget of not the reserve account?
No, that's how reserve accounts have been used, at least when I'm.
Yeah, no, they're savings accounts that we keep money in now
Yeah,
over a year.
But
yeah.
aren't they used every year?
Not completely,
Okay.
but they
Because
could.
the capital improvement.
Yeah, then I'll go on to capital improvement. Yeah,
What we were actually saving for bigger
Right.
investments that we weren't gonna bond.
Yeah.
But The
Yeah.
reserve accounts were basically just placeholders until that money gets spent.
right. And most often we do use it, but not always. Yeah. So, so a capital improvement program. So this is where the technicalities come of being a professional town manager, is that we actually set aside, and we call it a capital improvement program. We set aside accounts to put in money for the long term. So if we need a new fire piece of equipment, fire engines can be 500,000 to $1 million. It's just incredible. So that would go into, so we wouldn't expect taxpayers for us to fork over 500,000 to $1 million to buy a new fire truck. So we save it over time. This gets to the issue of how much should you save over time, because what's happening right now? Inflation. So it might not be such a good idea for us to put in so much right now when it's going to be eaten up by inflation. So those are decisions that the town manager would recommend that we would consider, and we might agree or we might disagree. So many years ago in this town, we did buy a fire engine, and the way it would work was that usually the fire chief has an idea that this is time to replace. And now in a capital improvement program, we have an expected year to replace. At that time, we didn't, but we have an expected year. So we know how much we think we want to save and how much we're going to float a bond for example, or get money, a loan, essentially. So the fire chief recommended a new fire engine, and they searched for a fire engine. And this is again where the controversy comes in when, so they found a used one. Whoa, do you like that idea? that Southwest Harbor would have a used fire truck. Doesn't bother you?
Depends how used.
Pardon me?
It depends how used.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
A month
exactly.
after you buy a new one, it's a used one.
Yeah, yeah. So it caused a little bit of controversy. It was a good deal, but it really made the fire department skittish about in the future about buying a used piece of equipment. We recently bought a used street sweeper. So they were kind enough, I think they brought it up to us, in fact. So someone went down to take a look at it in Connecticut, and the actual vendor brought it up to us. But sometimes those create controversies when they shouldn't necessarily. And then the other part of the budget that I want to talk to you about is the unassigned fund balance. And sometimes people will say that's the rollover, or that's kind of a place where you can take money from. Not really. So as the budget goes forward, we really are quite tight. And if you know about, there's not very many employees in this town, so we're quite tight. So if there's any money at the end of the fiscal year that hasn't been expended, it goes into the unassigned fund balance. But that doesn't mean that we can use it. That's actually a little savings account in a sense. And so if we want to reduce how your taxes are, how much you're paying in taxes, we might dip into that unassigned fund balance so that your taxes are reduced. But the recommendation is to keep anywhere from 18 to 25%. We've heard different numbers depending on who's discussing it with us. 18. So it's a lot of money, but it's used if there is an emergency or a major expenditure suddenly comes up in the year, the fiscal year. So it's there, but it's not a kitty that we can just use willy-nilly.
Good question.
Yeah.
Donna, online, are there still in existence in Maine any college courses like the ones you mentioned that would graduate professional town managers? If not, how is it a sustainable model of government?
That is a problem. So I teach the only class that's for graduate student. There is some work at University of Maine, Augusta. They have a public administration program. However, they have like one faculty member. So, and they borrow from business. So there's really not a lot who are trained. I'm keeping a list though. So I do know in the past 3 or so years, we've had people go into town management from the class that I have. But I'll tell you, I'm going to retire. I'm going to teach it one more time and that's it. So it's a problem. It's a problem. Yeah, Ryan.
I think that what we were told that when we were selectmen looking for town managers in the past was that you look towards other industries that
Yeah.
train logical thinkers and
Yeah.
problem solvers, and that sometimes architects or lawyers or other types of profession transition to
Yeah.
become town managers because they have that perseverance and problem solving experience.
Yeah. They can, and then each of the states has something. Ours is called the Maine Municipal Association, and they offer lots of training for the different responsibilities. So for the town clerk, for the town manager, the select board. So there's various kinds of training. And also what's nice here on Mount Desert Island is our town managers, including the islands that have administrative assistants in Trenton and Lemoyne, they gather together once a month and they do talk about various problems and how they can share resources and how to address whatever the particular issue is. So town managers here on the island and greater islands have support. In other locations, there's not that support system. So it's really impressive how our town managers and administrative assistants work. Did I hear something else?
I was just saying, if there's a way you could repeat some of these questions loudly.
Oh,
you
yes.
could Right, you can look right at the owl.
Yes.
And you can just.
Okay,
That'd
great.
be great, thank you.
Yep. Mhm. Yeah,
It sounds like there's quite a bit of money that is, the town is holding and not actually actively using. like
Yeah.
the unassigned fund balance and the capital improvement reserve and plus the cash flow. How is that money managed, invested to get some return on it?
talk to me after we have the budget meeting, because that's a major issue.
What was the question?
The question was, how is the money invested? And that's been a major issue for the town. How can we better invest our money? Yeah, Ryan.
But the town does currently have money invested. It's
Yeah.
not that there isn't,
Right.
it's not that it isn't invested at all. It's, at least when I was on the board, we looked through the amount of money that we needed quarterly and came up with a process of relatively safe investments that would churn every quarter to make sure that money was available.
Banks and short-term bonds.
Yeah.
and things like that.
You got it. It was all better than 0.05 money market account stuff. It was, but specifically, we wanted to make sure that the town wasn't short on funds at any given time to write checks.
Right.
But at the same time, we're almost trying to keep up with inflation on a yearly basis. That was the hope at the time.
And now we would not be keeping up with inflation. I just looked up what inflation is for New England, and it's 7% right now. This consumer price index is 7%. So it's a major issue, and that would be something part of the budget process that begins in January that we talk about. How much do we want to ask the taxpayers to put into a reserve account? How much do we want to put into the capital improvement program, given that inflation is rather high and we wouldn't be getting a return on that?
But the alternative of not putting that in is to ask the
Right.
taxpayers to take on a bond and have a greater debt service that retires at some point in time.
Right.
And the big question, at least when I was on the select board, was the balance of how much debt a town should have.
Right.
Versus how much they needed to keep in reserves to minimize large influxes or large scale payment purchases.
Mhm. Right. And the next purchase that you're going to have as a town, we hope will be that you'll be presented with information on our town garage, which you know has been in the making for many years now. And finally, we're getting closer. And so you may see some things in the paper sometime during the budget process about what's the next step on building the town garage. Yeah.
So is a rainy day fund and a reserve account one and the same?
No, we don't have a so-called rainy day fund. That's a term that they use about state government, and I suspect there's an auditor term for that rather than rainy day. So the unassigned fund balance, and that's the auditor's term, which is not easy to say, it is that place where we have monies should an event happen that we need to get money that is not in our budget. So we can't say, oh, we're not using as much money on administration, let's move it over to public works. The budget is established. So if something should happen and we need some major work in public works, there are a couple of things. A, do we have an ability to take it out of the unassigned fund balance? Or is this something that we want to go to the taxpayers and hold a workshop and then a vote on it? Other questions? Yeah.
To what extent, when expending the budget, to what extent are the managers required to stick out the exact amount in the line item in the budget? How much flexibility they have between moving line?
Okay.
between line items?
Within, say, public works, that can be moved anywhere. but only within public works. So they can't move it to police. They can't move it to fire. So because the budget is voted on by you, the people, we can't make that change. Now, if we were a town council and we didn't have a town meeting form of government, then that would be possible that they would. Even then, that would be something that would be seriously discussed because they're following a budget. So it's just not the same as business with, yeah, that's okay if we move it from here to there. It can't be done. Yeah, Ryan, you want some?
Well, just as an example of that, at one point we had to buy a new salt and sand truck.
Yeah,
And the cost of the salt and sand truck wasn't quite, we didn't have enough saved for it. It had gone up a little bit in order to get that salt and sand truck that year. In that particular budget cycle, we had to use some funds from another part of the highway department, right? Lydia, do you remember this? Anyway, so nonetheless.
it could have been
it
from the
was a matter
reserve.
of staying within the same department, but needing that truck and not having quite the budgeted money for it because of, I don't remember if it was $20,000 in difference, but so we grabbed a little bit more from that same department, but didn't take it from the police department or
Right.
the money that was expended on other aspects of the town.
So for the Zoom audience, so we can't get from one department to another, even if it's a legitimate, we can't switch it.
I do have a question.
Sure.
that You might want to answer later, but a couple folks are asking, why does there seem to be a high turnover of town managers? Are they really being evaluated fairly?
Okay, okay. Say that again?
Repeat the question so the Zoom
Okay.
people will know what.
So why is there turnover and of town managers, and are they being treated unfairly? Is that correct? Evaluated unfairly. It's a really hard job. You have 5 bosses. That's really
That
hard.
change,
Pardon me?
that change. You have 5 bosses that are
That
elected.
change.
So it's not the same 5 bosses that you get to know and you please, and you know strengths and weaknesses and how to solve problems, but then a new select
Person comes on, mhm.
Will get added when, and you lose one,
Mhm.
2 at a time, or whatever the case is. And then it's that group of 5 bosses again, working together, and the new person coming into the mix may have something that they really want to see happen, and asking a lot of that town manager to do that. So it's a ever-changing set of bosses
Yeah.
that you're trying to please.
Mhm.
And then forget about the entire township that is asking of you. So it is an extremely difficult job.
And another thing that happens is we are fortunate to have local papers here. In many parts of Maine now, they're gone, but we are fortunate. But that also means that if the town manager says or does something, that becomes part of the a news story. And sometimes that can be very tough. And so some people decide that they don't want to be town managers after a particular newspaper article, or they want to move on to a bigger town. So if you're in Southwest Harbor, you might want to move on to a bigger town. So one person that we interviewed in this last go round, we were available and open, and Bar Harbor was available and open. And this person had quite a bit of experience, and they chose to go to the larger town. Yeah, Lydia.
I would also say that it's really helpful to have an annual evaluation,
Okay, I'll talk
as
about
it
that.
would be in any organization.
Mhm.
And that people are often reluctant to do that.
Mhm.
But I think as a town manager, it's really important to hear what you have done well
Mhm.
and where the select board might like to see you improve.
Mhm.
And I think that's an
Yeah.
area where this town could do a lot better.
And so in the town manager plan, remember Title 30A, In the town manager plan, it says that we have to evaluate the town manager. So do some towns do a better job than other towns? Do they? And what we're really saying is, how can 5 people mentor a town manager? And that's very difficult to do when it's 5 people. But yes, the evaluation, just as in the private sector, there are evaluations. It's required by Title 38 that we evaluate the town manager. And it's right on the calendar, so that every year it should happen. Okay. Okay. So as I said, we're different in that we don't have counties. We're also different because we have a lot of responsibilities because we have what's called home rule. And this is in Title 30A again. The state defers to local government. In many states, in fact, if there was a difference of whether the state should do something or whether the town should do something, it would automatically, the courts would rule for the state. Here in Maine, because we have home rule, the courts defer to local government. If there's any question of what local government is doing and what state government should do, it defers to local government. Now, there are some exceptions, and I put this down here. Environmental issues, generally speaking, state government is responsible for various kinds of environmental. And the one that affects us here on the island in Southwest Harbor is shorefront. Our land use ordinances related to the shorefront are pretty restricted by what the state says. And I put this one just to show you there's a little bit of idiosyncrasy in here. Junkyards there's requirements related to junkyards that the state has responsibility for. But in the wording, it also says that they will defer to some aspects of what the town says. So even with junkyards, but I thought, I guess that's environmental.
Yeah,
I
that comes
guess.
back to drinking water.
Yeah, yes, right. And that's where the environmental issues take place. Yeah. Mhm. And recently you may have seen that there have been some things related to workforce housing. The state did pass legislation that encouraged properties that the towns to change their land use zoning such that if you have a property that has water and sewer, that up to 4 accessory dwelling units can be put on one property. It doesn't affect us so much in that we are densely populated where we have water and sewer. And the other thing is that our land use ordinance is flexible. And so people can do that right now. They can put an accessory dwelling unit. And the example that I always give is the garage goes and somebody puts in a rental for the summer or they have their mother or mother-in-law in the garage. And so they build on. But that's where we're seeing some erosion in power, and the Maine Municipal Association got into big trouble because they said, no, we don't want state government interfering with the rights of local government. But on the other hand, this is the biggest issue probably for all communities. How do we house people? How do we figure out how people can afford to live in our towns? So it's not just us that live on the island. It's the state, it's the United States. People who are seniors are not moving out of their houses necessarily. So they have these big houses that they're retaining. So the next generation to come up doesn't have a location. The state is encouraging interfering with workforce housing.
Kristin Hutchins online has a question.
Yeah.
I think she's gonna go ahead and ask it.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, I think it's worth mentioning the state does defer to local governments, but the state sometimes, if we aren't paying attention, will sometimes create some program that they then expect the towns to fund. We hear a lot about unfunded mandates. So it really pays to pay attention to what our state government is doing. They may indeed defer to us in terms of execution, but they also sometimes defer to us in terms of how some program or another is going to get paid for. And one of the best things the Maine Municipal Association does, of which Southwest Harbor is a member, is be on the lookout for those things, to be vigilant, to see that we're not being asked to pay for things that we haven't chosen to do.
Yes. Mhm. Another comment. Okay, why does it take so long? Why does it take so darn long? Well, we advertise. Some of it's mandated that by state that we advertise for certain meetings. So there's very often a time between the advertising and the actual meeting. So there is often a requirement for public input. So things are going to take a long time to get through because of that need. And sometimes we even hold a second hearing, for example. So the next thing that will come up where we'll invite the public to be involved will be on the comprehensive plan update. And so we have reviewed it, and we're going to look at it again as select board members, but then it's going to go to you as the public to see what you would like to do. Part of it's on workforce housing. Another part is on just the general coastal erosion that is so a concern to a lot of people. So we chose particular areas to focus on in the comprehensive plan update. And this used to be a requirement of state government. Now they're out of that business. And so we're doing this because we feel this is important to look at. So that's part of why it's going to take so long. So for example, as I said, the budget is being looked at by the town manager right now, and we will look at it in January, and we'll hold intensive meetings, and people are invited to attend. It'd be hard to do on Zoom. We'll have Zoom, but it would be the hard thing to be a participant on Zoom for the budget meetings. And then it will go to what's called a warrant committee. And a warrant committee is a group of citizens that review the budget. They invite the different department managers to come. They invite the nonprofits to come. And so they go into the detail of the budget, just as we do. And it's a time when they can ask questions of the town manager. What is this? Can you explain this? So they learn about the budget, and sometimes they make a recommendation that is different from the select board. So they make a recommendation whether you, me, as a public, will vote for it at town meeting, along with the select board making a recommendation. So that takes up till the end of March. Then we have a little bit of lag there, and you know that is it the first week in May we have our town meeting. So all that takes time. So what will happen? Oh, I mentioned the comprehensive plan. So as the garage progresses, then we will hold public hearings on the garage to get your input into it. And that might be one meeting. If we see that there are some changes that you're thinking of or requesting, there may be another meeting. So, and finally, that will probably be on a ballot. So you vote on it rather than a town meeting. So all that will happen sometime this spring. So I've already mentioned how you can get involved, but you can ask a question at a select board meeting. So some towns set aside a time when you can come forward and ask a question. You have a concern, so you bring it forward, and then we say, thank you very much. Other towns have a particular time, so on an issue that they're covering, they'll have a time when you can speak after the discussion of the select board members or town council members, and you can speak. So it's set aside after each item on the agenda. And others, like us, say, if you have a question, raise your hand. So you can ask a question at any time. But this is the odd thing. It is a legislature, so it's not a requirement that we invite the public to speak. And that's why it's so kind of informal in our town, where you can raise your hand and ask a question. The planning board, I haven't talked about the planning board, but the planning board is all volunteers. So you could get involved in the planning board, and they review the land use ordinances. And you've seen in the paper, it can get quite controversial. Most particularly, we've seen in Tremont with the campground issue, that it becomes controversial at some point. But in fact, it's fairly cut and dry. The planning board goes through a checklist to make sure that whoever is requesting a permit meets certain requirements. So it is a checklist, even though it becomes something that comes forward to the paper. And that's because the public becomes involved and it starts to ask questions. And then also the planning board says, no, you don't have the information that we need something more. So it's a really tough task, but a very rewarded task if you're interested in how we handle our land. That's the place to go. And then we have task forces. We didn't call them task forces in the past, we call them just committees, but the latest one is the solid waste reduction task force that's going on. So we know that just trucking our garbage all over the state of Maine is rather expensive. We know that there's not a lot that can be recycled right now, but that task force is looking into ways that perhaps we can reduce our waste. So that's another possibility. And periodically task force come available. And as I mentioned, the budget workshops, the warrant committee, and then the comprehensive plan are the latest. Now I've got one thing, that picture, that's not from here. Vote no, stop sprawl, March 15th referendum. Vote yes, limit sprawl. Well, there is a right to, for citizens to present a referenda plural, referendum, if you wanted something on the ballot. It sometimes ends up being a problem though. But so I have some former select board members on Zoom, and I have a couple here. I don't remember a referendum in this town, but anybody on Zoom?
It may be related to the fireworks ordinance. I mean, that began as wanting to be a citizen's petition because the select board wasn't going to deal with it. And then it became clear that if the select board would pick it up and craft the language, it might be a better ordinance in the end. But
Okay.
it started out as a referendum movement.
Oh, okay. Okay, and when was that? Do you recall?
Oh, I don't know.
Pre-COVID.
5, 6, 7
Yeah,
years ago.
yeah, pre-COVID. Everything for me is
Yeah.
COVID, pre-COVID. Yeah,
Kristin Hutchins on the Zoom.
Okay. yeah. You remember something, Kristin?
The first time I was on the select board years ago, we were presented with a citizen's petition. And my understanding was always that in very few cases would we have a justification for not allowing that petition to go on the agenda. As it turns out, we did not allow it. It was a sensitive land use issue. And naturally, the people who collected the signatures were quite exasperated with us. But I remember we were advised by our attorney that the petition as it was worded would create a legal conflict for the town. So on the strength of that, the board absorbed the attorney's advice, and we didn't put the petition on the ballot. But that was at least a time where the attempt had been made.
Okay. Well, you can see in the photo that I have vote no, stop sprawl, and vote yes, limit sprawl. So sometimes there can be referenda that aren't written well. Yeah. Okay.
The cruise ship controversy in Bar Harbor. is a-
Yes, they've had
example.
problems with that, yeah, with the writing of it. Mhm. Yeah, where what if we voted yes on two things that conflicted, yeah. Yeah, so we have had it in the neighborhood. Mhm. Yeah,
I just want to mention on the how can you get involved items, there are many other committees that our town seeks volunteers for, Shellfish Committee and.
oh, yes,
There's, a whole list on the website that if anybody has interest. in
cemetery committee,
Getting on these. committees,
conservation
it's-
commission.
There's an awful lot of ways to get involved if you have an
Yeah.
interest in one of those.
Yeah, yeah, please do look at the website, and if I have people that are from outside of Southwest Harbor, other towns would have websites with volunteer committees as well, yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna end this with some more detail. It's not Title 30A. But I thought I would talk a little bit about this, and again, I'm talking informally, I'm not a lawyer, so sometimes people will say, oh, the town could get sued. And it's frequently that they say town can get sued. Well, pretty much no. It's the Tort Claims Act 14 MRS 741-103, and it follows. And a tort is a wrongdoing. So a person could say that the town had done something wrong. It doesn't have to be that it's legitimate, that they've got information behind them. If they wanted to hire a lawyer, yeah, they could. But towns have immunity, and we call it sovereign immunity, but it has exceptions, so it's not completely sovereign immunity. And sovereign immunity means the king can do no wrong. So the state can do no wrong, so it has sovereign immunity. The towns have sovereign immunity, and this is by the legislature, Title 14. So except as otherwise expressly provided, governments are to be immune from suit. And that includes in the performance of or failure to perform discretionary functions. So, you feel as though we didn't do something correctly that we should have. We still are not liable for that. Now, there's always exceptions. So as I talk about this, there are always going to be exceptions, and that's where you get the lawyer. But if you remember in Tremont, for many years, there was a suit going on brought by a person that owned a restaurant in Tremont that burned down. And they were concerned that the fire department had not treated the fire properly. And so by and large, they had sovereign immunity, but that didn't stop the process. So we as towns have insurance, and they had to go to court. So a lawyer for the town of Tremont had to continually go to court. But by and large, a fire department that's unable to stop a fire from burning down the restaurant wasn't liable, whether they did a good job or didn't do a good job. But again, we're not lawyers, so did they get sued? Yes. So there's a couple of ones that I'll point out to you that I just find odd, and there's some other ones in the legislation, but the town can be sued for negligent use of vehicles, and the town can be sued for the operation and maintenance of public buildings. So we need to keep up our public buildings. So those are two that I thought I'd bring up. And again, there's some others, and there can be some exceptions, and that's why we have lawyers. And based on the state law, employees could be sued and up to $10,000. And government and its employees less than or equal to $400,000. So it's not that you can't be sued, it's that it's not, we have immunity by and large. But you will see those incidents, and it was really tough on Tremont going through, and probably, and as I say that, tough on the former restaurant owner, because that restaurant owner felt that a wrong had occurred, and that's what a tort is, just a wrongdoing.
I have a question from a Zoom.
Okay,
Catherine Nelson, the town is.
Carolyn, I believe it's also true that public
on.
employees have a right to their job. The relationship between public employees and the town is different than a private employer-employee relationship. And that if an employee were to be fired, for example, if the town wasn't careful to follow due process, the town, I believe, could be sued in that place as
Yes.
well.
Yes, because they have the right to their job, a due process right to, public employees have a due process right to their jobs. So a public employee, if the town manager decides suddenly to say, clean out your desk, leave. Well, they have a right to some sort of hearing. And since the town manager is the one who's responsible, the hearing would go to the select board to make a decision about whether this was proper. So they have a due process right. And like any employer, the public sector can't discriminate against based on sex, national origin, race, religion, color, disability, and a number of other things. So that still holds. Yes, you're right. So that's that's an exception. Mhm. And in fact, town employees have much more power than an average employee in the private sector. Mhm. Go ahead.
Sure. The town has a significant summer resident population. The town, they may not be registered to vote in the town, but they do pay real estate
Yeah.
taxes. What is or should be the role of summer residents in town governments?
They can participate. Anybody can come on to ask a question at select board meeting. So there's no reason that they can't participate. But I think it's an example in our constitution, so we're going writ large, so federal, state, that we have people that are taxpayers that do not have that right to vote in a particular town. Now, there are some exceptions. So there are a couple of villages in Maine where they have a special law that allows the summer residents to vote, because they're by and large summer locations. I think one of them is Lucerne in Maine, and there's something like Newport or something. There's another one too. So actually that's feasible. It just hasn't come to be all over. Yeah.
It's also possible for summer residents to serve on the town committees
Yeah.
that are advisory committees.
Yes.
Not on the planning board or not on the conservation commission, which are covered under state law, but
Right.
on the advisory committees, we have had summer residents
Yep.
as members.
Yep. The Conservation Commission does have associate members.
Yeah.
So they're not voting, but they're on it, and they don't live in town. So that's possible too. Mhm. Yep. And that's another interesting situation where the Conservation Commission, the way it's established is by state law. We don't have to have a Conservation Commission, but if we did, it's established how it's structured in state law. Other questions? Yeah.
There's been a fair amount of public discussion about conflict of interest
Mhm.
issues
Yeah.
on various towns in the island. In Southwest Harbor, does Southwest Harbor have a specific conflict of interest policy? And if so, how is it enforced?
Yes, we just developed one. So we do have one in the state law, Title 30A. Again, it says that you can develop an ethics policies. Sometimes they're called professional conduct policies. They have different names from town to town, but yes, we do have one. It's enforced by the goodness of people believing in it.
Self-enforced.
Yeah. Mhm. Yep.
Carolyn, is that available on the town website?
We don't have it on the website, but that would be something that we could have. We don't have our policies So we don't have policies that aren't law. And so an ordinance is law and a policy is how we want to run ourselves. So for example, all of our personnel policies could be up on our website. They don't happen to be on our website, but that's how we want to run employee issues through a personnel policy. The benefit of having a personnel policy versus a law, and some states, some towns put their personnel policies into law, so they have an ordinance, is that if we see a problem, we can change it at our board meeting. But could be, I think one of our issues with our website is that there's a limited amount of time for our employees. We have really a small staff, so there's a limited amount of time, but yep, it's
Kristin
possible.
Hutchins has another comment.
Okay, thanks. Kristin?
Carolyn, could you talk just a little bit about the previous remark on the conduct policy reminded me. Could you just talk a little bit about what does and doesn't constitute a conflict of interest? I think people are genuinely concerned about that from time to time. I mean, I think we're all interested. Of course, we're interested. When does our interest in the quality of how our town is run and how our committees are run, when is there a conflict?
One of the conflicts has to do with your relatives, how you're related to a person that is serving. That's one of the major conflicts. You must be thinking about something, Kristin, and I'm not sure what you're thinking about.
I've heard, here's a couple of things where I came across it.
Okay.
Person's job and livelihood. It's been implied from time to time. I can think of 2 or 3 examples in the past where a person's job or livelihood was suggested that they were prejudiced on a topic because of their job or livelihood. I remember trying to get a realtor once to join the planning board, and she said, I won't say who it was, it doesn't matter. And she said she couldn't, that would create a conflict of interest. And I thought she might be a person precisely well-equipped to join a planning board because of her knowledge and information. There would be specific circumstances under which she couldn't vote. And I'll make another example. It would seem to me that lobstermen are supremely qualified to join the harbor committee, yet there might be circumstances when they ought to recuse themselves from certain votes. Now, the harbor committee is only advisory, so perhaps it is not an issue there. But in the issue of the planning board, I tried to persuade her that she could indeed join. I don't think she really wanted to. But when would a person in such a position have a conflict and when wouldn't they?
When the conflict would occur if she's or he is selling a property that's before the planning board. So
If the planning board,
the person's a realtor gives her or him expertise, but if the issue is related to their property or their business, then they would need to recuse themselves. So if
the planning board comes to a collective decision and makes a recommendation on a change to the land use ordinance that could be construed generally to benefit, say, the real estate business, is that a conflict?
No, because it would be specific. What we're looking at is something that's specific to the land use. Does it say anything specific benefit to that realtor's business?
Okay.
But because small towns are we're going to have relatives that we know in small towns, and so we are going to have conflicts of interest. And so the professional conduct policies usually say not only the direct conflict of interest, but the perception of the conflict of interest. And that's why it's so tough. And so that's why it's based on you making a decision that you have a conflict of interest. It's based on goodwill that we make those decisions. And if we've made a decision that others would feel we need to take note of our fellow board members or our committee members, what we're doing.
Kenneth Brooks online has a
Okay.
question. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, thanks for your input tonight. It seemed to me that the closest we've had to a referendum in town was the response special town meeting to discuss the Chris Pond issue and the housing and the development of that property. The response of the electorate, the citizens of the town, was overwhelming. I've never seen anything like it. There were just a few votes against, and all the rest were all in favor of it as a referendum. Now, there were two more meetings after that. I happened to be in attendance in both of them. These were meetings of the Board of Selectmen, Select Board, sorry. And in those cases, there was an unfortunate situation in that there were only 4 votes because of resignations that had taken place with the Select Board. And as it happened, the vote was 2-2, a tie vote, which was interpreted as a negative vote, even though the electorate, the town citizens were overwhelmingly in favor of it. And what I'm wondering is it possible that this could be reconsidered in some way, a vote of the Select Board a third time? 3 times you're out, but I'm wondering if something that's clearly had the support of the townspeople were thwarted by just a few votes. And
and it is possible to bring up things again. An example that's not as controversial, at least right now, is merging dispatch with county. But it is possible to bring that up. For those that don't remember, there was a warrant article town meeting that supported applying for a grant to develop Chris's Pond. And the vote was overwhelmingly in favor of doing so, but the Select Board did not wish to go forward. So it is possible. Maine Coast Heritage Trust, which was working on the grant, did purchase the land. So it is possible, and it makes sense that if people were interested, that the start would be during the budget hearing process. I have former Select Board members here, Lydia and Ryan and Kristin. Do you think that's when the best time would be? To bring it
You have to
forward.
be sure that it ends up on the warrant. I mean, that the Select Board would need to discuss it and get it on the warrant.
Yeah,
But because there isn't any large expense for the town,
Right.
it's not a major budget issue.
Good
But
point.
it would have to go, I think, to the town. And that means it has to get on the town meeting warrant if the Select Board so chooses.
okay, and so we put non-financial or warrants on that we vote on, and many of us leave before that happens at town meeting, but in this particular town meeting, everybody was there. Yeah, Ryan?
I was just gonna say the most important timing of that is early on in January or very beginning of February, so it doesn't get missed to get onto the ballot, whether it's at the town meeting at the school or whether it's written. Either way, the time frame of the legalities of the public notice and the meetings that fall the 60 days out are the toughest things to always meet when you come in late. So I think, to answer the question very, very soon and to follow up
Mhm.
and to make sure that the items are on the agenda and that the
Mhm.
public hearings are scheduled so that there isn't a failure of timing to get it onto the actual ballot.
And Ryan mentioned 60 days, so there are specified days where we have to have the warrant articles established before we go to town meeting. So you've got to get out there too. Other questions on Zoom?
Not right now.
Okay, okay, no more questions? Yeah.
So, say the planning board, how does one become a member of the planning board? Do you
Go walk into the,
you walk in and say,
I'd like to be a member. Yep,
Planning board.
Yep.
You have to go to the town office and
Yep.
get an application.
Okay,
And then you would get on the agenda of the select
Select
board
board.
to
okay.
hear your request to become a member, and then they would then either appoint you or not.
so please do if you'd like to be on the planning board. Mhm. Other questions? I
Can I
think,
ask one about, you said that any town could be
Say what? I wanted to-
a city or a town.
yeah,
And so cities have, so it's not particular that cities have town councils versus,
no,
so if we're a 30A, Title 30A, because of the town manager situation, what are councils? Are they also 30A or is that
No.
different?
so what happens is that by default, every town in Maine was a town manager plan of government. And so then some towns decided that they didn't want to have a town manager, they had an administrative assistant. So they were still in the town manager plan, but they weren't going to expend the money for a town manager. And historically, that would have been the case, that the select board would have run the town. So what they're saying is we need a little bit more help by administrative assistant. What happens is that a town decides that they need more detail that is in their ordinances than is provided by Title 38. So they decide to establish a charter. And again, the example, excuse me, in Bar Harbor is that they've been arguing about their warrant committee, actually. So it was in their charter how the warrant committee was going to be structured, whereas we don't have anything in a policy or by Title 30A that says how the warrant committee. We're establishing it as another committee that we have every year and that needs to follow some rules of being open to the public, so transparency, and recorded because it's an important committee. But that is not in state law, and that's not since we don't have a charter. So that charter establishes how the town wants to be run. And so Bar Harbor seems to have chosen to have kind of a hybrid because they retain the town manager that would be similar to any town, but there may be things in their charter that the town manager is responsible to do that we don't necessarily have. So when a town establishes that charter, it just is laying out some more formal procedure. And as I said, they might have their personnel policies embedded into it, and then they'd have to change the charter if they did. So it doesn't create a city. So if they wanted to change the name of from town of Bar Harbor to city, I bet that they might have to have that go to the state. I don't know. But in terms of legislation, there's no difference. So state law doesn't treat cities any differently than towns. But if we went to another part of the country outside of Maine, most states have it by that there are certain responsibilities of towns of this size, and this size, and you're only become a city if you're a certain size, and then you take on more responsibilities.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, but it's very odd. But again, it's historically what we had.
So I have a question. It's very complicated, everything, and so and we're all getting tired. But I'm
Yes, it's
wondering if
time.
we could have another meeting to just talk about, like, I hear citizens, my neighborhood gets very excited about certain things. But
Yeah.
I don't, and maybe because I've only lived here 6 years, other people have lived here a long time, but, or you mentioned the garages. I mean, garages are now like, whoa, that's a huge issue.
It is. It's
So
gonna be
where-
very expensive too.
Could we, so I as a citizen don't know, well, when we in our neighborhood get all upset about something, where should we, how do we address it? How do we address it? How can we do things to make changes without having to have a huge referendum or something?
Right. So you mentioned a concern about fences, and so that's a planning board issue. So I looked it up a little bit, but I'm not a planning board member and I've never been a planning board member, but taking away your views. So right now, the land use ordinance appears, and again, I'm not a planning board member, appears to mandate certain buffering when a project takes place. That is, build fences or build berms or put in trees, but not the reverse of what you're suggesting, is that we actually don't want our neighbors to have fences because it takes away from our views. So in that particular case, you'd first want to talk to the code enforcement officer to see if that really is something that's not there. That there's nothing to stop a person from putting a big fence so you can no longer see. So you'd want to talk to the code enforcement officer. Then if you really did have a concern and you want to move forward on that, you might want to talk to the planning board chair. But after that, you might really want to talk to your other family, friends, neighbors to talk, to come before the select board. And the way you do that is through the town manager, so that it could be put on the agenda.
Okay, that would be one, yeah.
Yeah, I know, so it's a lot of
Yeah,
work.
and then garages, or, people worry about, oh, they're gonna take their shore property and they're gonna add to it, and what do, I mean, there are all these different things that
Right.
citizens are talking about.
Right, and sometimes it's not right, and sometimes it is correct. So that's where you need to talk to someone. So again, to give you the example of the Holden town manager. Oh, plow sidewalks, we're not gonna give up plowing sidewalks, but they don't have any. Yeah.
So like, it's wonderful that we now have handicap accessible, speaking of sidewalks. I don't know who was responsible for that and who we
State.
should thank. The state,
Yeah.
okay.
Got one quick question.
Yeah, we're done, really.
Yeah, and the two in the town office is paid. Who are the paid employees of the town? Is it, you've got the town manager, you've got the
Town clerk,
town clerk?
assistant clerk,
Okay.
public, I think his official name is highway foreman, public works director, harbor master.
Your finance person too.
We don't have one. We have a bookkeeper. What's her title though? I think she's a clerk. That's it.
Then the entire police force.
And the police.
The fire chief and his assistant.
Fire chief is part-time, but yeah,
The question was about employees in the town office.
Oh, just the
Yeah.
office.
Yeah. yeah.
So I'm just going to pick up on this suggestion and give us an opportunity to find these chairs less comfortable after an hour and a half.
Yes.
That perhaps Carolyn will entertain another inquiry from the library to host a second round of questions. We might even manage it in a different way that's advantageous to those in the room and those on Zoom. But I think this education and public access to town leadership beyond the formal meetings that Carolyn has been describing to us would be a service the library would really enjoyed speaking as a member of the board, not an employee and not the director.
Right,
But I
yeah.
certainly will take it back as feedback and we'll see
Mhm.
about making this happen. And then Lydia made a suggestion earlier that something like this probably ought to run, since we had several questions about seasonal people,
Yes,
do this in the season when they're here. So they
In
can
July.
ask their questions and hear from
Yeah.
the leaders they might not necessarily even see.
Mhm.
So we'll keep this conversation going. And I want to thank all of you for coming. And I know that Carolyn, I keep speaking for Carolyn now, she's accessible, you can be in touch with her with your questions as they come up.
Yes.
And you can go into the town office and start a question, and the question that you asked about, where do I start with this
Yeah.
concern? Start at the desk in the town office, and they will keep you focused in the right direction. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Carolyn, for this time and your preparation.